We are being given a warning, and that warning is Sydney, Australia. The lockdown there is so intense, they deployed soldiers, the military, to patrol the streets to make sure people were abiding by the lockdown. You see, what happened was Sydney announced that they were going to lock people down, and then people said, I'm going to do what I want. Then the police came in and said, you can't do what you want. So they said, yo, we're going to protest. And then the government said, yo, we're going to deploy military. Now, it's going to get worse. They're saying that even if you have multiple properties, they're banning you from going to like a vacation house. If you live in the city and you have a vacation house somewhere far away and you're like, I'm going to get out of the city. They're like, nope, you can't do that anymore. You are locked down. And that, my friends, should be a big warning for everybody. You see, when the pandemic first started, people in New York, the rich people were like, we're going to leave. They left. They went to Martha's Vineyard, or they went down Long Island, or they went to Connecticut. They got out of New York City. And to a certain extent, many of them got out of New York State. Now you see what's happening in Australia. On top of that, they will be deploying more soldiers to enforce the law. Well, I guess I shouldn't call it law. I should call it edict. But man, do I got a weird story to start off with. A very, very weird story. Obviously, you clicked this video because of a different headline, but we're going to get into the lockdown stuff. We just absolutely have to start with this story because this is insanity. Suspected saline switch sparks vaccine stir in Germany. I am 150% opposed to what this nurse did. The gist of the story is, in March and April, when people in Germany went in for the vaccine, a nurse switched the vaccine for saline solution. They don't know exactly why she did it, but they're saying it's because, well, they're not saying it's because, but they're saying she has expressed vaccine skepticism. Yo, if I go to a doctor and I say, I would like to choose this thing for my health, and you swap it with anything else, yo, that's messed up. I get it. Saline is mostly harmless. But who authorized this nurse to inject them with something else? If you want to go get vaccinated, it's between you and your doctor. And I recommend you go and have that conversation. But could you imagine a nurse switching out your medication for a placebo or for nothing? That's messed up. That's real messed up. But you can see the bifurcation, as it were, in whatever is happening here. It's absolutely insane. From Reuters. Authorities in northern Germany appealed to thousands of people on Tuesday to get another shot of the COVID-19 vaccine after a police investigation found that a Red Cross nurse may have injected them with a saline solution. The nurse is suspected of injecting salt solution into people's arms instead of genuine doses at a vaccination center in Friesland, a rural district near the North Sea coast in the early spring. Quote, I am totally shocked by this episode, Sven Ambrosi, a local councillor, said on Facebook, as local authorities issued the call to around 8,600 residents who may have been affected. While saline solution is harmless, most people who got vaccinated in Germany in March and April, when the suspected switch took place, are elderly people at high risk of catching the potentially fatal viral disease, the actual group who need to get that vaccine. Well, I should say, I always talk to your doctor, but I think it's fair to point out, when we're talking about risk assessment, the elderly are those who are at risk. Police investigator Peter Beer, speaking earlier at a news conference covered by German media, said that based on witness statements, there was a reasonable suspicion of danger. The motive of the nurse, who was not named, was not clear, but she had aired skeptical views about vaccines in social media posts, police investigators said. It was not immediately clear whether the suspect had been arrested or charged in the case, which, according to the broadcaster, NDR has been handed to a special unit that investigates politically motivated crimes. Local police declined to comment outside of normal working hours. You see, here's the issue I have with all of this. Extremism. If somebody goes to their doctor and they have a good doctor they trust and they say, what's my risk? And they say, listen, you're over 65 and you have a comorbidity. You should seriously consider this. I think that's between the person and the doctor. And if you are younger or you have Guillain-Barré syndrome or something like that, and the doctor says, I recommend you not do this, or it's a pregnant woman, that's between you and your doctor. Not me, not anybody else, not mandates. Creepy tribalist extremists who want weird apps for getting in and out of buildings and stuff. This, on the other hand, is the other side of that coin. Going to a doctor, talking to them, It is not your position to tell someone else what they should or shouldn't be doing with their medication. This nurse crossed a line. Fortunately, it was saline. But could you imagine if you went into a doctor and you were like, yo, doc, I need a vitamin B12 shot or something. And they were like, okay. And the nurse was like, I'm going to secretly give him the vaccine. I get it. That's substantially worse because saline is harmless and a vaccine is an actual medication. The point is, I cannot imagine going to a doctor and them secretly trying to stick me with something else that I did not consent to. I believe in informed consent. The nurse had no right to do that. Look, man, right now we have COVID. It's there. It's in the world. I don't know what the solution is. It certainly seems like the restrictions and the lockdowns are the exploitation of a crisis. We had Michaela Peterson on the Timcast IRL podcast the other day, and she was talking about what COVID was like. And, you know, it's not fun. We've had many guests who have had COVID in the past, and they tell us, you're fatigued, you're tired, you're coughing, shortness of breath. It's not fun. Now, if you are worried about that and you go to a doctor and make a decision with them, I believe the doctor needs to give you all of the information they can. They should be able to answer all of your questions. And if they can't, find a doctor who will. And if you go to a nurse and you determine based on your conversation with the doctor and your risk factors, because you're an elderly person and they're vaccine skeptics, that, my friends, is actual anti-vaxxing. That is insane, in my opinion. Now, you get people on the left, the establishment, telling everyone everywhere. My issue, for the most part, is we must have informed consent. We must have people making the choices for themselves when they communicate with medical professionals. And I do not believe we should have government-mandated vaccinations. But they can do it. It's been legal for some time. And I'm no fan. I'm more worried about this. From news.com.au. Big changes coming to Sydney's lockdown. They say a rejig of the single bubble, banning trips to beach houses, and a heavier ADF presence are among big changes to Greater Sydney's lockdown, with New South Wales police given 48 hours to redraft public health orders and get the state back on track. Police Minister David Elliott and Police Commissioner Mick Fuller briefed the NSW Crisis Cabinet this afternoon, with Minister Elliott and Health Minister Brad Hazard involved in a fiery discussion. During the meeting, it was decided that the New South Wales police force, and their legal team will go away and look at redrafting our public health orders. According to Nine, police simply believe, as it stands now, the public health order is next to impossible to enforce. Among the changes, people who are going to their second residences, like a beach house, will be banned from doing so. And there will be a big rethink regarding the single bubble. While it won't be canned, police are expected to tweak it to make it easier to check that people are only coming into contact with their one nominated person. The New South Wales government is also expected to request more ADF troops to come in and police these orders. My friends, you are on the cusp of martial law. Now, the key defining characteristic of martial law is when a military commander asserts what is or isn't law and has supreme authority to draft or remove certain laws. Colloquially, this is martial law, when the military comes in to enforce edict. I don't think in my opinion, martial law I don't think it should require for this term, a military commander assuming authority, because you can have a politician standing next to the authority and say, oh, don't worry, we're in charge. And how would you know anyway? When the military comes in and says you can only be in contact with one person, man, I hope y'all are paying attention, because this is the canary in the coal mine. Australia is a Western nation, not too dissimilar culturally from the United States, but they have their own culture for sure. And this is what happens with no Bill of Rights. And this is what happens when you have a disaffected population, when people just don't care, and when they refuse to stand up. Too many people, cowardly. Too many people say, I have too much to lose and I refuse to fight. I'll just tell you this. I understand, I don't have a family, as I often say, but I'll just remind everybody, if you do not stand up for what you believe in and get in that political, get into politics, then you will leave behind a world for your children where they will be unhappy and they will suffer. And that's their inheritance, I suppose. That's what our children are going to be receiving. Melbourne extends COVID lockdown. No jab, no job in Sydney. I hope y'all are ready for what's to come here, because we're like a month or two behind Australia? Reuters reports Australia's second biggest city, Melbourne, will stay locked down for a second week after reporting 20 new COVID cases as it struggles to stamp out infections caused by the highly infectious Delta variant. Melbourne had been due to exit the lockdown on Thursday, the sixth lockdown for its 5 million people in stop-start battles against COVID, also seen elsewhere across the country, have triggered frustration and discord. In Sydney, police are stepping up lockdown enforcement, while some laborers are being allowed to return to construction sites if vaccinated. You see? It's a two-tier system. You get the vaccine, go live your life. And that's what they've been saying. They've been saying, we're going to make it so that it's hard on those who are not vaccinated. I think informed consent comes first. And I think there are certain people who are unable to get the vaccine who would like to. And I think discriminating against them is wrong. And they will be. Quote, if we were to open, then we would see cases akin to what is happening tragically in Sydney right now, Andrews told reporters in Melbourne, referring to an outbreak in Australia's most populous city that has spread to thousands despite Sydney being in week 7 of its lockdown. We have seen a surge in the number of cases, and that is expected to continue. New South Wales State Premier Gladys Berejiklian told reporters in Sydney, reporting another 344 new infections in the past 24 hours, close to the city's single-day record. Berejiklian said the Sydney lockdown, which has grown to include several areas north of the city, will also be expanded to include Dubbo, a small city about 248 miles northwest of Sydney. The latter is scheduled to remain in lockdown until the end of August. Most expect the restrictions to be extended despite a recent surge in people seeking vaccinations. Byron Bay, a popular tourist spot near the New South Wales border with Queensland and nearly 500 miles north of Sydney, was this week plunged into lockdown when a man allegedly drove there with his 2 teenage children. That's it, by the way. Authorities said the man, now hospitalized with the virus, has not cooperated with officials when asked about his movements. And on Wednesday, police said they have charged the unidentified man with contravening lockdown orders to stay at home. No jab, no job. Desperate to restart some major employment industries, New South Wales has allowed some in the most affected Sydney suburbs to return to construction jobs around the city, but first they must be vaccinated. I didn't want to get the vaccine, but I needed to get the jab or I don't have a job, said Nick, a 31-year-old man who drives for an engineering company. He declined to give his surname. Australia has so far fared much better than many other countries in the developed world during the pandemic. With just under 37,000 COVID cases, the death toll rose to 944 on Wednesday after 2 people, including a man in his 30s, died in Sydney. But with fewer than 25% of the country fully vaccinated, Australia is struggling to avoid stop-start lockdowns that some warn could tip Australia's economy, the world's 13th biggest, according to the International Monetary Fund, into a second recession in as many years. Yes, I really do think that's the direction things are going. I think that what they're implementing is a 2-tier system. They're trying to do the same thing in the U.S., and we actually have people expressing as much in Sydney from the New York Post. We are not the virus. 2-tier Delta lockdowns divide Sydney. Now, I want you to consider something. They mentioned in Australia, if you have a beach house, you are no longer allowed to go to there. That means if you live, it's almost like, it's like they're building a big wall. They've announced there's going to be a big wall between this portion of the city and that portion of the city, or this portion of the country and that portion of the country. I wonder how much time you have left to get to that beach house before they lock you down completely. And then what happens if you're there? Are they going to drag you out and bring you home? I have no idea. From the New York Post, they say, on the sands of Bondi Beach, one of Sydney's wealthiest suburbs, surfers and seaside walkers jostle for space, while joggers clog the nearby promenade and fitness buffs huddle around public exercise equipment. To the west, where COVID infections are greatest, stores sit shuttered on empty streets as some of Australia's most migrant-heavy neighborhoods endure heightened lockdowns enforced by high-visibility policing backed up by the military. About 3/4 of New South Wales state Nearly 5,000 active cases come from 9 Sydney local government districts. Urban sprawl stretching about 7 miles southwest of the Sydney Harbour Bridge to the Blue Mountain foothills. The community here is really struggling at the moment, and they feel there's a double standard, said Bilal El Hayek, a councillor from the city's west who spends most days helping deliver food packages to people who don't qualify for pandemic-related support. You see photos and videos coming out of the east, people on the beach, whereas here the streets are absolutely empty. Are you paying attention yet? The wealthiest areas dancing around on the beach, going for a jog, doing whatever they want. The poor and migrant areas locked down. So what do you want to call that? Class-based segregation? As Australia's largest city struggles to contain its worst outbreak of the pandemic, the harsher restrictions and tougher policing in its most affected neighborhoods have stoked resentment in its most vulnerable people. That feeling is especially raw since the Delta outbreak began in Bondi with an unmasked, unvaccinated airport driver. Though the whole East Coast city of 5 million is in lockdown, around 1.8 million in its ethnically diverse West are banned from leaving their immediate surroundings and doing any face-to-face work. Authorized workers must be tested every 3 days, and masks are mandatory outside homes. The rest of the city is getting by with construction and property maintenance allowed. Fewer movement restrictions and masks not required outdoors. Schools, which have been closed citywide since June, are returning everywhere but the West. Even the refugee communities who came here 40 years ago. How do we think these people will feel in a situation like this? Alpha Moraitakis, CEO of Syd West Multicultural Services, which provides aged care and settlement services for refugees, of course they feel targeted. Mervat Altarazi, a Palestinian refugee who is also a Syd West caseworker, said the police and army presence has raised doubts in her clients, many of them from countries like Iraq and Syria. It's like a shock for them as they believed they arrived in a free country, and they say we face the same what we faced in our home country. Some of them told me we are not the virus. New South Wales police declined a request for comment. Tim Sutphamasane, trying to pronounce these names, a former federal race discrimination commissioner, called Western Sydney the heartland of multicultural Australia. If we don't get this right, we will undermine the social fabric of the city for years to come, he said in an email. I think they're going to. I think they are. I think they are cold, callous. They are classist. If you are rich, go do your thing, I guess. If you're poor, we're going to lock you down because you are the stupid rabble. Now, here's my fear. It's coming here. I don't know how it will be implemented. I don't know when. And you know what? There's a good possibility. Maybe it doesn't. But take a look at this from the New York Times. YouTube suspends Rand Paul for a week over a video disputing effectiveness of masks. Dr. Senator Rand Paul can say his opinion. Not that I agree with him. I think you should talk to your personal medical practitioner. He wants to give his opinion as a doctor, as a legislator. And they've banned him. They've also banned statements from Senator Rand Paul when he was talking about a particular individual that you can't say on YouTube. YouTube took down C-SPAN. Is this not alarm bells? We are frogs in a pot boiling. I love looking at all, 1984. Orwell was trending. And all these establishment Democrats were like saying things like, Orwell was a socialist and he'd be making fun of you right now for trying to compare everything that's going on to 1984. But it's true. You've got people who believe things that aren't true about the economy. You've got private. Well, I guess maybe 1984. Maybe it isn't right because the government isn't taking over necessarily. It is a lucrative merger between corporation and state. Dare I say, quite a bit fascist. I think Rand Paul should be allowed to have his opinions. I think Rand Paul should bring up whatever evidence he wants to bring up and make his point. And I think it should be challenged. But you know what I'll do? I'll do just that. First, defending his right to free speech. He should not have been suspended. This is creepy. The restrictions are coming here. We've seen them already in many ways. But I'll tell you this. Well, a lot of people like to say, masks don't work or something like that. I actually disagree with that. I'm not going to pretend like they're the solution or the end-all be-all cure or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. What I can say is you've got the frontline coalition of doctors or whatever that group is called. They're the ones who talk about treatments to, like they talk about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Full disclosure, those things are not approved as any treatments, but these are the people who are advocating for that stuff, and they advocate for masks. No joke. They literally advocate for masks. These are the people that are being banned and censored. Okay, so while those treatments are not FDA approved, we're also seeing tweets from, this is really interesting, Brett Weinstein tweeted this, where one of these doctors said that it looks like their protocol isn't working on the Delta variant on many people, and that people should take this seriously. And then a lot of people responded with like, gee, there's a vaccine available, which is really interesting. It is. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I think you should talk to your doctor about it. But I do think it's fascinating to see that even those doctors who are talking about alternate treatments are saying you should wear a mask. It's fascinating. Now, for the most part, I live in the middle of nowhere. We don't have to wear masks for anything. And like in the middle of nowhere, you don't. You're in the woods. It's ridiculous. When you see somebody who might be sick wearing a mask, totally fine with it. When I see somebody wearing a mask, I don't care. You can do whatever you want, okay? I'm not about telling you to adhere to any kind of culture or authority. I'm more libertarian, all right? You want to wear a mask, by all means. I don't care. If there's a store that requires masks, and if I have the choice not to go there and go somewhere else, I probably just go somewhere else. But otherwise, I really don't care about wearing a mask in a store. It's always been weird to me that people, choose your battles, right? But I will say, right, let's not get into the tribalism. You know what I mean? That's why I find it interesting that you have these doctors who advocate for these alternate treatments telling people to wear masks. I'll put it this way. If somebody wants to wear a mask, by all means, go ahead and do it. If a private business wants to say that you have to wear a mask, okay, fine, whatever. In Australia, the cops pulled a guy over for driving in his car without a mask. Now, that is insane. Here's what I was trying to get to. Like, I don't know, whatever, a little all over the place. The point of this segment, this whole thing, I opened with the nurse swapping someone's medicine. Dude, that's nuts. Don't take medication away from somebody who wants it. You might not want it. You might not like it, but people can choose to do what they want. If someone goes to the doctor and they say, I'd like to get this medicine, that nurse is insane to have not administered it and given them saline. And then in Australia, sending the soldiers out in the streets, also insane. Man, I don't know how we wade through this the extremism. You know what I mean? YouTube should not have suspended Rand Paul. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.